Hello dear friends. Welcome back to Emerald Dreams, where we journey together into the misty heart of Ireland's most captivating legends and folklore. Tonight, I invite you to settle into comfort, perhaps with a warm cup of tea beside you, as we venture into waters both beautiful and terrifying. We're going to explore one of Ireland's most fearsome cryptids, a creature that has haunted the lakes and rivers of the Emerald Isle for centuries. This is the tale of the Dobhar-chú, the water hound. As twilight descends over the quiet lakes of Ireland, when the surface of the water becomes as smooth as glass and reflects the fading light like molten silver, there are those who claim that something stirs in the depths. Not the gentle ripple of a fish breaking the surface, nor the playful splash of an ordinary otter at its evening hunt. No, what moves beneath these waters is something altogether more ancient, more powerful, and infinitely more dangerous. It is a creature that belongs as much to nightmare as it does to nature, a being that has left its mark not only in the oral traditions passed down through generations, but carved in stone, immortalized on a gravestone that still stands today as a silent testament to its terrible reality. The Dobhar-chú occupies a unique place in the pantheon of Irish mythological creatures. While the banshee wails her warnings of death, and the leprechaun guards his pot of gold with mischievous cunning, the Dobhar-chú represents something more primal, more visceral. It embodies the very real dangers that water has always presented to the people of Ireland. In a land where lakes are plentiful, where rivers wind through every valley, and where the sea has shaped both geography and destiny, water has always been both life-giver and life-taker. The Dobhar-chú is the physical manifestation of that dual nature, the dark side of the waters that sustain and nourish. What makes this creature particularly fascinating, particularly haunting, is that unlike many of the beings we explore in Irish folklore, the Dobhar-chú may not be entirely mythical. There exists physical evidence, eyewitness accounts spanning centuries, and a consistency in descriptions that gives even the most hardened skeptic pause. As we journey together tonight through the mists of legend and into the cold, dark waters where this creature is said to dwell, we'll examine not just the stories, but the tangible traces it has left behind. We'll walk the shores of Glenade Lake where tragedy struck on a September day in 1722. We'll trace the evolution of sightings from the 17th century right up to the present day. And we'll try to understand what truth, if any, might lie at the heart of this enduring mystery. So pull your blanket a little closer and let the outside world fade away. Tonight, we're not just telling stories. We're diving deep into one of Ireland's most compelling and terrifying legends, seeking to understand why the Dobhar-chú has maintained its grip on the Irish imagination for so long, and why, even today, there are those who swear they've glimpsed something impossible moving through the waters of remote Irish lakes. The name and its meanings. Before we can truly understand the Dobhar-chú, we must first understand its name, for in Ireland, names carry power and meaning that reaches far beyond simple identification. The very sound of the words, when spoken correctly, seems to carry with it an echo of ancient tongues, of languages that were old when the Roman Empire was young. Dobhar-chú. The pronunciation flows like water itself, Dobhar-chú, though you'll hear variations depending on which corner of Ireland you find yourself in. Some pronounce it Duragu, others say Dorigo or Dobhar-chú. These variations aren't mistakes or corruptions of the original. Rather, they represent the natural evolution of a name that has been passed from generation to generation through oral tradition, shaped by different dialects, different accents, different ways of hearing and reproducing sounds that belong to a linguistic tradition stretching back thousands of years. The name itself breaks down into two distinct parts, each carrying its own weight of meaning and history. Dobhar is the ancient Irish word for water. Now, you might know that the modern Irish word for water is use, the same root that gives us the word whiskey, that most Irish of spirits. But Dobhar is much, much older. It's a word that predates even the medieval Irish manuscripts, reaching back to a time when the Celtic peoples first settled these islands. You can hear echoes of Dobhar in other Celtic languages even today. In Welsh, water is dwr. In Cornish, you find similar forms. This linguistic kinship speaks to a shared heritage, a common understanding of water's importance that united the Celtic peoples across time and distance. The second part of the name, Chú, means hound or dog in Irish. You might recognize this element if you're familiar with the great hero of Irish mythology, Cuchulainn, whose name literally means the Hound of Culan. The use of Chú rather than the more common Madra, for-dog, is significant. It suggests not a domesticated animal, not a pet or companion, but something wilder, more primal. A hound was a hunting animal, a creature of power and purpose. To combine it with water, to create a water hound, was to name something that hunted in the lakes and rivers with the same ferocity and determination that a hound might hunt on land. But the Dobhar-chú has other names as well, titles that reveal different aspects of its nature and the fear and respect it inspired. Perhaps most evocative is its designation as the King Otter or Master Otter. These titles place the creature at the apex of its realm, suggesting not just that it resembles an otter, but that it rules over them, that it stands above the ordinary animals of lake and stream as a king stands above his subjects. In Scottish folklore, there are similar tales of an otter king, a creature of unusual size and power that was said to be accompanied by 7 black otters, attendants to its royal presence. The parallels between the Irish and Scottish traditions here are striking, suggesting either a shared cultural memory or, perhaps more intriguingly, observations of the same type of creature on both sides of the Irish Sea. The title King of all lakes and Father of all otters appears in historical accounts, specifically in correspondence from the 1890s where naturalist H. Chichester Hart describes hearing rumors of just such a creature. This grandiose title elevates the Dobhar-chú beyond mere cryptid or monster. It makes it into something almost mythological, a progenitor, and your otter from which all others might have descended. Intriguingly, Dobhar-chú is also one of the 2 most common Irish words simply meaning otter. This dual usage, the same word meaning both the ordinary otter and this legendary monster, creates a fascinating ambiguity. It suggests that perhaps the line between the natural and the supernatural was never as clear as we might assume. When a fisherman or a woman washing clothes at the lakeshore spoke of seeing a Dobhar-chú, did they mean a normal otter, or did they mean something else, something larger and more dangerous? The language itself seems to acknowledge that sometimes nature produces individuals that transcend the ordinary, that become legendary in their own right. The creature has also been called the Irish crocodile, a name that seems almost comical until you consider the characteristics attributed to it. Descriptions place the Dobhar-chú at anywhere from 7 to 15 feet in length, roughly the size of a substantial crocodile. Like a crocodile, it's described as a fierce predator, aggressive and territorial, capable of bursting from the water with shocking speed to attack anything that strays too close to its domain. The comparison to a crocodile also carries with it implications of armor-like skin, of a creature difficult to harm, almost impervious to ordinary weapons. Other regional names and variations exist throughout Ireland and Scotland. Some call it the An-chú, others the Dobhar-chú. Each variation, each different pronunciation and spelling, represents a different community's relationship with the legend, a different way of incorporating this creature into local tradition and oral history. In some areas, the name was spoken in hushed tones, with genuine fear. In others, it became almost a folk character, a boogeyman used to keep children away from dangerous waters. But beneath all the variations, all the different names and pronunciations, lies a consistent core: water, hound, danger, mystery. The very multiplicity of names speaks to the widespread nature of the legend. This wasn't a story confined to a single village or a single lake. The Dobhar-chú, by whatever name it was known, had established itself across the Irish landscape, in the folklore of communities separated by mountains and bogs and vast expanses of countryside. The fact that these disparate communities all independently maintained stories of a similar creature suggests either a common origin for the tales, or perhaps, just perhaps, multiple encounters with something real. A monster described. To understand the terror that the Dobhar-chú inspired, we must paint a picture of the creature itself, drawing from the various accounts and descriptions that have accumulated over centuries. But here we encounter an immediate challenge, for the Dobhar-chú seems to resist simple categorization. Witnesses have described it in ways that sometimes complement each other and sometimes contradict, creating a composite image that is both vivid and frustratingly incomplete. The most consistent element across nearly all descriptions is size. The Dobhar-chú is not merely a large otter. It is something extraordinary, something that defies the normal parameters of known animals. Witnesses consistently place its length at somewhere between 7 and 15 feet, though most accounts cluster around the 7 to 10 foot range. To put this in perspective, a standard European otter might reach 4 feet in length including its tail. The Dobhar-chú, therefore, is reported to be 2 to 3 times larger than any normal otter, placing it in a size category more comparable to a small crocodile or a very large seal. But size alone doesn't capture the creature's appearance. The Dobhar-chú is described as a chimera, a hybrid that seems to draw physical characteristics from multiple animals in a way that creates something entirely unique. Most accounts emphasize its dog-like or hound-like qualities, particularly in the head and limbs. Witnesses speak of a canine skull structure, though often elongated and somewhat flattened, more like a greyhound than a bulldog. The snout is described as powerful, filled with sharp teeth designed for tearing flesh rather than the crushing molars of an herbivore. Some accounts mention eyes that gleam with an almost intelligent malevolence, set forward in the skull like a predator's eyes rather than positioned on the sides like prey animals. The body itself is typically described as streamlined and muscular, built for power and speed in the water. Here the otter-like qualities become most apparent. The fur, when visible, is described as thick and waterproof, sometimes sleek and smooth like a river otter's, other times appearing coarser and more robust. The legs are powerful and well-developed, more substantial than an otter's, capable of propelling the creature with surprising speed on land as well as in water. Several accounts specifically mention that the hind legs appeared larger and more muscular than the front legs, giving the creature an almost kangaroo-like locomotion when it moved on land, rocking from side to side with each bound. The tail is another consistent feature in descriptions. It's portrayed as long, thick, and muscular, clearly used as a powerful rudder and propulsion aid in the water. Unlike the rounded, tapering tail of a typical otter, some witnesses describe the Dobhar-chú's tail as more substantial, sometimes even slightly flattened, though accounts vary on this detail. The tail often features a tuft of longer fur at its end, a detail that appears carved on the famous gravestone that we'll discuss shortly. The coloration of the Dobhar-chú varies wildly from account to account, perhaps suggesting either multiple individuals with different coat patterns or the difficulty of accurately perceiving color in the low-light conditions where most sightings occur. Some witnesses describe the creature as jet black or very dark brown, so dark as to appear almost like a shadow moving through the water. The 1896 account by Miss Walkington specifically describes it as half wolf dog and half fish, but provides no color information. However, one of the earliest documented encounters, from Roderick O'Flaherty's 1684 account, describes a creature with black slimy skin, without hair, though this detail seems unique to that particular sighting and might have been the result of the creature being wet and the observer's terror distorting perception. Other descriptions present a completely different color scheme. Some accounts speak of white or pale gray fur, sometimes accompanied by black markings. Particularly intriguing is the recurring description of a dark cross-shaped marking running from the neck down the back, a detail that appears in multiple independent accounts and even in some artistic representations. Some descriptions mention black ear tips as well, creating a striking contrast with the pale body fur. The 2000 sighting on Omi Island by artist Sean Corcoran added another unique detail: orange flippers or webbed feet, a characteristic not mentioned in any historical account but vivid and specific enough to be noteworthy. The head shape has been compared to various animals depending on the witness and the circumstances of the sighting. Most commonly, it's described as dog-like or hound-like, but some witnesses have compared it to a sheep's head, particularly when describing sightings at Sraheens Lough in 1968. This comparison might seem odd until you consider the elongated muzzle and forward-facing eyes that sheep possess, characteristics that might indeed appear similar to a streamlined canine skull when glimpsed briefly in poor lighting or at a distance. The ears are typically described as small, lying flat against the head in a manner similar to an otter's, designed to present minimal resistance when moving through water. Some accounts add a particularly nightmarish detail. The Dobhar-chú is described as having a somewhat fish-like quality, leading to descriptions of it as half dog, half fish. This characterization might stem from the creature's apparent seamless mastery of both aquatic and terrestrial environments, or perhaps from its smooth, streamlined shape when moving through water. One account even mentions a horn protruding from the forehead, though this detail appears only once in the collected folklore and might represent either an extremely unusual individual, a misidentified feature, or an embellishment added over time as the story was retold. The paws or feet of the Dobhar-chú receive particular attention in several accounts. They are described as unusually large, well-developed, and powerful, capable of propelling the creature with frightening speed. Some descriptions emphasize webbing between the toes, though the extent of this webbing seems to vary. The claws are frequently mentioned as being long, sharp, and clearly designed for gripping slippery prey. These paws are said to leave distinctive tracks, though unfortunately no clear photographs or casts of such tracks have entered the historical record. Perhaps most chilling are the behavioral characteristics attributed to the creature. The Dobhar-chú is universally described as aggressive and territorial. Unlike the shy, retiring nature of normal otters which typically flee from human contact, the Dobhar-chú is portrayed as actively hostile to humans and other large animals. It's said to attack without provocation, particularly if encountered in or near what it considers its territory. The creature is described as fearless, showing no hesitation in confronting beings much larger than itself. The Dobhar-chú is also noted for its intelligence and determination. Once it has fixed on a target, it pursues with single-minded ferocity, following prey from water onto land, capable of maintaining pursuit over considerable distances. This relentless nature appears again and again in the accounts, creating an image of a creature that, once provoked, will not be easily deterred. Most remarkably, the Dobhar-chú is said to mate for life and to travel in pairs. This detail appears consistently across different time periods and different locations. When one member of a pair is injured or killed, it supposedly emits a distinctive cry, a whistle or screech that summons its mate. This whistle is described in various accounts as eerie, haunting, high-pitched, and unlike any sound made by known animals. The responding mate then emerges from the depths, driven by what can only be described as vengeance, pursuing the attacker with even greater fury than the original creature displayed. This characteristic, the idea of a bonded pair that will avenge each other, adds a layer of tragedy to the legend, suggesting these monsters possess a capacity for loyalty and grief that makes them seem less like simple beasts and more like thinking, feeling entities. The speed of the Dobhar-chú is another frequently emphasized characteristic. In water, it's described as being incredibly fast, capable of crossing the width of a lake in mere seconds. Witnesses speak of it moving through water with barely a ripple, then suddenly surging forward with explosive power. On land, While perhaps not quite as swift as in its natural element, it's still described as moving with shocking speed, that side-to-side rocking gait carrying it forward in great bounding leaps that can rapidly close the distance between predator and prey. The tragedy of Glenade Lake. Of all the stories surrounding the Dobhar-chú, none is more famous, more tragic, or more thoroughly documented than the events that unfolded at Glenade Lake on September 22, 1722. This is the tale that has defined the Dobhar-chú legend, the account that transformed it from vague folklore into something that demands serious consideration. It's a story of love and loss, of terror and revenge, and at its heart lies the very real grave of a young woman named Grace Connolly. Glenade Lake lies in the northwestern part of Ireland, in County Leitrim. Even today, it's a place of haunting beauty, nestled in the Glenade Valley with the imposing mass of Ben Bulben Mountain providing a dramatic backdrop. The lake itself is relatively small, perhaps a mile or so in length, its waters dark and deep, reflecting the changing Irish sky like a mirror of polished jet. In 1722, the area around the lake was even more remote and wild than it is today, with scattered settlements clinging to the fertile land near the shore while the surrounding mountains remained largely untouched by human habitation. In the townland of Crevalia, at the northwestern corner of the lake, there lived a young married couple. The husband's name was Terence MacGloylin, though in the traditional Irish manner of the time, his wife retained her maiden name of Connolly, and was known locally as Grace Connolly, or in Irish, Grain Ni Connolly. By all accounts, they were an ordinary couple, living an ordinary life. Terence likely worked the land, as most men in that place and time did. Grace would have maintained their home, prepared meals, cared for any livestock they might have owned. It was a simple existence, but one that countless couples throughout Ireland's history have lived. On that fateful September morning in 1722, the exact date varies in different tellings, with some sources citing September 22nd, others the 24th, and still others the 27th. The weather was fair. Some versions of the story specifically mention it as a beautiful day, the sun climbing in a cloudless sky, the air carrying the crisp hint of autumn, but still holding enough warmth to make outdoor work comfortable. Grace made her way down to the lakeshore carrying a bundle of clothes that needed washing. This would have been a regular chore, one she had probably performed hundreds of times before. The lake would have been calm, its waters clear, the perfect place to wash linens and garments in the clean, cold water that flowed down from the mountains. What happened next is the stuff of nightmare. As Grace knelt by the water's edge, scrubbing and rinsing, something stirred in the depths. Whether she heard it coming, whether she had any warning at all, we can only imagine. But according to the accounts that have come down through the generations, suddenly, explosively, a massive creature burst from the lake. It was a Dobhar-chú, one of the legendary water hounds, though whether Grace had time to recognize what it was, whether she knew the stories and understood the danger she was in, we'll never know. The attack was savage and brief. Based on what was found, the creature's size, strength, and ferocity would have made resistance futile. Grace screamed. This detail appears in the oral tradition, a sound that should have carried across the water to the nearby settlement. But if anyone heard, they either didn't recognize the sound for what it was or couldn't reach her in time. Within moments, it was over. Grace Connolly lay dead on the shore, her blood staining the rocks and mixing with the lake water, her life cut tragically short. Different versions of the story disagree on what happened next, on how long Grace lay there and how her husband came to discover her fate. Some accounts say that Terence heard her scream and came running immediately, racing down to the lake with his heart pounding and his mind filled with dread. Other versions, perhaps more realistic in their pacing, say that hours passed. As the day wore on and Grace failed to return home, Terence's concern grew. Perhaps he initially assumed she had gone to visit a neighbor or had taken longer with her washing than expected. But as afternoon faded toward evening and still she hadn't appeared, worry transformed into genuine fear. He retraced her likely route, calling her name, checking the paths she might have taken. Finally, inevitably, he made his way to the lake. The sight that greeted him there was one that would have broken any husband's heart. Grace lay on the shore, her body torn and blooded, unmistakably dead. But there was more, something that transformed grief into horror. Lying across Grace's body, apparently sleeping, was the creature that had killed her. The Dobhar-chú, satiated after its attack, had settled atop its victim as if guarding its prize. In some versions of the tale, it's described as sleeping peacefully, its sides rising and falling with each breath. In others, it's said to have been grooming itself, cleaning Grace's blood from its fur with the fastidious care of a cat. For a moment, Terence stood frozen, his mind struggling to process the scene before him, grief and rage warring within him. Then something inside him snapped. Without thought for his own safety, driven by a fury that transcended fear, he turned and ran back to his home. His hands shaking, he grabbed a weapon. Different versions of the story give him different implements. Some say a dagger, others a sword, still others a pike or spear. The specific weapon matters less than the determination with which he gripped it as he raced back to the lake. The Dobhar-chú was still there, still lying across Grace's body. Terence crept close, moving as silently as he could manage, his heart hammering so loudly in his ears that he was certain it would wake the beast. Then, when he was close enough, he struck. The blade plunged into the creature, seeking its heart, and the Dobhar-chú jerked awake with a shriek that echoed across the water and up into the mountains beyond. But Terence's strike was true. The creature thrashed for a moment, its powerful body convulsing, and then it lay still. For an instant, Terence might have thought his ordeal was over, that he had avenged his wife and could begin the terrible process of mourning. But then the dying Dobhar-chú drew in a great breath and released it as a sound unlike anything Terence had ever heard. Accounts describe it as a whistle, a shriek, a cry of such volume and such otherworldly quality that it seemed to freeze the blood in his veins. It was a death cry, yes, but it was also a summons. The waters of Glenade Lake erupted. A second Dobhar-chú, larger than the first and filled with a rage that made the first creature's aggression seem mild by comparison, burst from the depths. This was the mate of the Dobhar-chú that Terence had just slain, and it was coming for revenge. What followed was a desperate pursuit that would become legend in its own right. Different versions of the story diverge here more than anywhere else, each adding its own details, each emphasizing different aspects of the chase. In one version, Terence's horse, which he had presumably ridden to the lake, broke free in terror at the sight of the emerging creature and bolted. Terence had no choice but to run on foot, with the Dobhar-chú in pursuit. He fled through the countryside, his legs pumping, his lungs burning, the creature always just behind him, its feet pounding the earth, its breath hot on his heels. He ran to a neighboring village called Grenade, also known by the wonderfully evocative name Bad Horse, where he finally managed to stand his ground and face his pursuer, killing it in a desperate battle. But the most widely circulated version of the tale gives Terence a companion and a cunning plan that seems more plausible than a simple foot race with a monster. In this telling, Terence didn't face the creature alone. Either his brother or a close friend accompanied him when he went to discover what had delayed Grace. When the second Dobhar-chú emerged, both men fled, but they had horses, and they leaped into the saddle and rode hard. The Dobhar-chú pursued them for miles, never tiring, never slowing, its determination as relentless as death itself. The horses, already frightened by the sound of the creature's mate's dying whistle, now ran in sheer terror, foam flying from their mouths, their hooves eating up the distance as fast as their legs could carry them. Behind them, the Dobhar-chú followed, sometimes visible in the gathering dusk, sometimes hidden by the terrain, but always there, always coming on. The chase led them through the Irish countryside, across fields and over stone walls, through streams and up hillsides, until finally, exhausted, with their horses beginning to falter, the men reached a place called Cashel-Garan, also known as Castle Garden Hill, in County Sligo. There, by great fortune, they found a blacksmith's forge still operating despite the late hour. They hammered on the door, calling out for help, and the smith, seeing their terror and hearing their wild tale, took them in. According to the story that's been handed down, the blacksmith knew what to do. Whether from his own experience or from stories passed down through generations, he understood the creature's tactics. He advised the men that when the Dobhar-chú attacks, it goes for the horse's legs first, dropping its head low and trying to bring the larger animal down. He told them they must be ready. When the creature lunges and commits to the attack, that's when they should strike. Go for the back of the neck, he said. It's the only way. Whether the blacksmith knew this from his own experience or from stories passed down through generations, we don't know. But his advice would prove crucial. The men positioned their horses carefully, standing them on clear, high ground where they would have room to maneuver. Then they waited, weapons ready, as darkness fell completely over the Irish countryside. They didn't have to wait long. The Dobhar-chú appeared, its eyes gleaming in the darkness, reflecting the light from the blacksmith's forge. It approached warily this time, perhaps sensing the trap, perhaps simply cautious after the long pursuit. Then, with explosive speed, it charged, just as the blacksmith had predicted. It went low, aiming for the legs of Terence's horse. But Terence was ready. As the creature committed to its lunge, as its head dropped and its powerful jaws opened, Terence brought his blade down with all the strength that desperation and grief could lend him. The sword caught the Dobhar-chú at the base of its skull, biting deep into the vulnerable place where spine met skull. The creature's momentum carried it forward for another few feet, but it was already dead, its severed spine ending all movement, all thought, all vengeance. The second Dobhar-chú lay dead, and Terence MacGloylan stood over it, his wife avenged, his own life somehow, miraculously, preserved. The terror was over, or so it seemed at the time. The stone that remembers. Walk today through the Irish countryside, through the townland of Drummans near the village of Kinlow in County Leitrim, and you'll find a cemetery called Conwall, also rendered in Irish as Congbale. It's a quiet place, as graveyards often are, with stones of varying ages scattered across the green grass, some standing upright, others lying flat as time and weather have laid them low. Among these stones, close to the wall of the cemetery, lies one that draws visitors from around the world, people who come specifically to see this one grave, this one memorial. It's the grave of Grace Connolly, and carved into its surface is an image that has haunted and fascinated observers for nearly 3 centuries. The stone itself is a flag of sandstone, lying flat against the earth now, though it may once have stood upright. It measures approximately 4.5 feet long by nearly 2 feet wide. Time and weather have not been kind to it. The inscriptions that once clearly marked Grace's name and the date of her death have been worn down by rain and wind and the slow erosion of centuries. Portions of the stone have broken away entirely, particularly at the bottom corners. In some places, the surface has flaked and crumbled, taking text with it into illegibility. But what remains, what has somehow survived the passage of 300 years, is the carving at the center of the stone, the image that makes this grave unlike any other in Ireland. Set in a panel measuring about 17.5 inches by 8.5 inches, carved in relief so that it stands slightly proud of the surrounding stone surface, is the depiction of a creature. And not just any creature, but unmistakably, undeniably, a Dobhar-chú. The carving shows the beast lying in its death throes, its body twisted in a pose that conveys both its final agony and its once formidable power. The head and neck are bent dramatically backward, arching so that the top of the skull nearly touches the creature's back, a position that suggests the massive trauma of the killing blow. The body is clearly canine in its overall structure, with powerful legs, a deep chest, and haunches that even in death look muscular and strong. The tail is long and substantial, ending in a tuft of fur that the carver took care to delineate. But there are otter-like qualities as well. The ears are small, almost tiny, lying flat against the head in a manner very unlike a typical dog or wolf. The paws are enormous, out of proportion to what one would expect even on a large dog, with splayed toes that suggest webbing, though the carvings where makes it impossible to be certain of such fine details. The neck is heavier, more substantial than a dog's, giving the creature an almost bear-like quality in that region. Most striking of all is the weapon. A spear or pike is shown piercing the base of the creature's neck, entering at a spot that we would now recognize as corresponding to the junction of the brainstem and spinal cord. The weapon passes entirely through the beast's body, emerging from the underside and continuing down to where it terminates in a barbed point. At the top of the weapon, clearly visible, is a human hand, clenched in a fist, gripping the shaft. The hand is surprisingly detailed, with individual fingers discernible, their positioning suggesting the force with which the weapon was driven home. There's something profoundly human and touching about that carved fist, that representation of a husband's grief and rage transformed into action. The existence of this carved image raises fascinating questions. Who made it? When exactly was it carved? While the inscription includes a date, September 24th, 1722, according to those who have been able to read the worn text. Scholars generally believe the stone itself was created sometime after the event, probably while the memory was still fresh in the community's mind. Patrick Tohall, who extensively studied the stone in the 1940s and published his findings in 1948, noted that similar carved tombstones in the same cemetery and in nearby Kilrusk Cemetery are characteristic of the period between 1722 and 1760. Based on this analysis, the stone was likely created within a few years or possibly decades of Grace's death, when there were still people alive who had known her, who might even have witnessed some of the events or their immediate aftermath. The level of detail in the carving suggests the work of a skilled mason, someone who knew how to work stone, how to make an image that would endure. But the specific choice to depict the Dobhar-chú, to show it in such detail, raises intriguing questions. Patrick Tohall provided a detailed description of what was visible on the stone. The head and neck bent backward to lie flat on the animal's backbone, a weapon entering the base of the neck and re-emerging below the body, held by a human right hand shown clenched with fingers facing the viewer. The carved figure appears to show paws that are unusually large, and a head with small ears, very much like an otter's. One interpretation is that the carver may have worked from description alone, though the combination of canine and otter-like features is so specific that some suggest the actual creature's body might have served as a model. The stone serves multiple purposes. Most obviously, it marks Grace's grave, ensuring her final resting place wouldn't be forgotten even as the years passed and living memory faded. But it's also a warning, a permanent reminder of the dangers that lurked in Ireland's waters. Every person who came to this cemetery would have seen the stone, would have been reminded of what happened to Grace Connolly. Parents could point to it, using it as a cautionary tale to keep their children away from the lake's edge. Do you see that stone? Do you see what happened to Grace Connolly? This is why you must be careful near the water. This is why you must never go to the lake alone. But perhaps most significantly, the stone serves as evidence. This is what elevates the story of the Dobhar-chú from folklore into something that demands more serious consideration. Anyone can tell a ghost story, can spin a tale of monsters and terror. But here is physical evidence, a memorial erected by a community that believed the story enough to record it in stone. The expense and effort of creating such a carved stone would have been considerable in 1722. This wasn't done lightly or for entertainment. This was done because people believed it needed to be done, because what happened to Grace Connolly needed to be remembered. When Patrick Tohall examined and photographed the stone in the 1940s, he was able to read portions of the inscription that are now illegible. His records preserve details that have since been lost to erosion. According to his notes, the stone identified the deceased as Grace Connolly and gave a date in September 1722, consistent with the oral traditions. There was apparently additional text as well, though Tohall noted even then that much was already difficult to read. In the decades since his study, additional weathering has made even more of the text impossible to decipher without specialized imaging techniques. Interestingly, there was once a second Dobhar-chú gravestone, marking the grave of Terence MacGloylan himself. This stone was located in Kilrusk Cemetery at the southern entrance to the Glenade Valley. As of World War I, it was apparently still intact, though broken into two pieces. At some point after that, perhaps in an attempt at preservation, the pieces were placed on a boundary wall. Unfortunately, this well-meaning effort at conservation resulted in the stone's disappearance. At some point in the mid-20th century, the pieces vanished, and despite extensive searches by researchers and local historians, they've never been recovered. We have no photographs of Terence's stone, no drawings, only descriptions from those who saw it before it vanished. According to these descriptions, it too bore an image, though whether it depicted the second Dobhar-chú or some other scene, we no longer know. The loss of Terence's stone is tragic from a historical perspective, but in some ways, it makes Grace's stone even more precious. This single carved piece of sandstone, weathered and broken though it may be, is the sole surviving physical evidence from 1722 of an event that shaped folklore and legend for centuries to come. It's been photographed countless times, examined by historians and folklorists, visited by cryptozoologists and curious tourists. Some come seeking proof of the Dobhar-chú's existence. Others come simply to pay respect to Grace Connolly, a young woman whose ordinary morning errand ended in tragedy. Still others come for the mystery itself, drawn by the question that the stone poses but cannot answer. What really happened on that September day in 1722? Ancient encounters and early records. The tragedy at Glenade Lake in 1722 may be the most famous encounter with a Dobhar-chú, but it was far from the first. The creature appears in written records dating back decades earlier, and if we consider oral tradition, the legends extend back into the mists of Irish prehistory, to times when such tales were the only way knowledge was preserved and passed between generations. The earliest known written reference to the Dobhar-chú comes from Roderick O'Flaherty, an Irish historian and scholar who lived from 1629 to 1718. O'Flaherty was a remarkable figure, the last recognized chief of the name of Clan O'Flaherty and the last de jure Lord of Connaught. Despite losing most of his ancestral estates to Cromwellian confiscations and enduring considerable hardship, he became one of Ireland's most respected historians, a collector of Irish manuscripts, and a man who took seriously the stories and traditions of his people. In 1684, O'Flaherty published a chorographical description of West or Hir Connaught, a work written in English that provided a first-hand account of the geography, natural history, and folklore of Western Ireland. In this book, he recounted a story from an earlier incident at Loch Mask, also called Miasca or Measc, a large, deep lake in County Mayo that stretches for approximately 6 miles. The account O'Flaherty recorded is chilling in its matter-of-fact tone, presenting extraordinary events as if they were simply part of the natural world, unusual perhaps but not impossible. A man was walking along the shore of Loch Mask, staying close to the water's edge as he travelled. At some distance away, he noticed what appeared to be the head of a creature swimming in the lake. He assumed it was an ordinary otter, a common enough sight, and thought nothing more of it. He continued on his way, his mind on other matters. What the man didn't realize was that the creature had spotted him. It had lifted its head above the water specifically to locate him, to mark his position. Then, having determined exactly where the man was, it dove beneath the surface and began to swim underwater, moving with purpose and speed toward the shore, toward the exact spot where the man would pass. O'Flaherty's account continues with the man suddenly finding himself seized by the creature, which had burst from the water and clamped onto him, attempting to drag him back into the depths of the lake. The attack must have been terrifying, coming without warning, the man suddenly finding himself in the grip of something far more powerful than any otter had a right to be, its jaws locked on his flesh, its weight bearing him down toward the water. But this particular man was fortunate. He was carrying a knife, as many travelers of the time would have done, and he had the presence of mind to use it. Even in his terror, even as he felt himself being pulled toward the water and a likely death by drowning, he managed to draw his blade. He struck the creature on the head, the blow either stunning it or causing enough pain to make it release its grip. With the creature momentarily disabled, the man cut it again, this time inflicting a wound serious enough to drive the beast away. It released him completely and retreated into the water, leaving the man bleeding but alive on the shore. O'Flaherty's description of the creature is particularly valuable because it comes from a period before the events at Glenade Lake, establishing that the Dobhar-chú legend wasn't created by that later, more famous incident. He records that witnesses described the creature as having black slimy skin, without hair, or in another account having the color of an ordinary greyhound. These descriptions don't match each other perfectly, which actually lends them credibility. Different witnesses, different sightings, different lighting conditions, all producing slightly varied accounts of what was nevertheless recognized as the same type of creature. O'Flaherty also notes that similar beasts had been observed in other Irish lakes, establishing that the Dobhar-chú was not confined to a single location. He records that the Irish called it Dobhar-chú, i.e. water-dog, or onchu, which is the same thing, providing us with some of the alternate names and spellings that would proliferate over the following centuries. Moving forward in time, we find another significant written reference in the Journal of the Royal Society of Antiquaries of Ireland, dated 1896. A woman named Miss L. A. Walkington wrote a letter to the journal describing a legend she had heard during a recent visit to Bundoran in County Leitrim. The legend concerned a tombstone in the graveyard at Cornwall, the very stone we discussed earlier marking Grace Connolly's grave. Miss Walkington's letter provides several important details. She identifies the creature involved as something called by the natives a duragu, providing another pronunciation variant and confirming that the name was still actively used in Irish-speaking communities 2 centuries after the events it described. She describes the creature as half wolf dog and half fish, a characterization that emphasizes both its predatory, canine nature and its aquatic lifestyle. Her account, while clearly based on oral tradition passed down over generations, helped bring the story to the attention of scholars and antiquarians, ensuring it wouldn't be lost as the older generation who remembered the tales passed away. A few months after Miss Walkington's letter appeared, another correspondent, Mr. H. Chichester Hart, responded with his own information. Hart was a naturalist and author who had done extensive work documenting Ireland's flora and fauna, lending his response a certain scientific credibility. He reported that he had heard rumors of a creature called the Dobhar-chú, which was said to be king of all lakes and father of all otters. Hart's description emphasizes the creature's position at the top of some sort of hierarchy, suggesting it wasn't merely a variant or mutation of an ordinary otter but something categorically different, something that commanded or ruled over the normal otter population. Hart also reported the intriguing detail that the Dobhar-chú could run his muzzle through rocks, a statement that might refer to the creature's supposed ability to pursue prey relentlessly over any terrain, or perhaps to some quality of its physical power that seemed to transcend normal limitations. This detail adds another layer to the creature's legendary status, making it not just a physical threat, but almost supernatural in its capabilities. These written accounts are precious because they bridge the gap between oral tradition and documentary evidence. They show us that educated people, scholars, and historians who were part of the intellectual establishment of their times took these stories seriously enough to record them, to publish them in academic journals, to treat them as legitimate subjects of inquiry. While this doesn't prove the Dobhar-chú's existence, it does demonstrate that the legends were widespread, consistent, and believed by enough people to warrant serious attention. But we must also consider what these accounts don't tell us. They don't provide measurements precise enough to determine the creature's exact size. They don't include sketches or detailed anatomical descriptions that might allow us to compare the Dobhar-chú to known species. They give us no information about how these creatures might reproduce, what they might eat besides human flesh, where they might den, or any of the other details that would allow us to place them definitively within the natural world. What we're left with are stories, frightening and consistent stories certainly, but stories nonetheless, accounts of encounters that were brief, traumatic, and filtered through the perceptions of terrified witnesses who were more concerned with survival than with documenting a new species for science. The Sraheens Lough sightings. For nearly 2.5 centuries after the tragedy at Glenade Lake, the Dobhar-chú remained primarily a creature of folklore and oral tradition. There were presumably sightings and encounters during this long period, stories told around peat fires in isolated cottages, warnings passed from parents to children about the dangers of certain lakes and rivers. But few, if any, of these accounts made it into written records. The Dobhar-chú seemed to be fading, becoming less a creature that people actually encountered and more a story people told, a legend that was gradually losing its connection to lived experience. Then came 1968, and suddenly the Dobhar-chú legend exploded back into contemporary relevance with a series of sightings that remain among the most detailed and intriguing in the entire history of the phenomenon. These sightings occurred at Sraheens Lough, a small lake on a kill island off the western coast of County Mayo. While Sraheens Lough is modest in size, with a circumference of only about 1,200 feet, it apparently harbors something extraordinary. The first documented sighting occurred on the evening of May 1st, 1968. The time was approximately 10 o'clock at night, late enough that true darkness had settled over the Irish countryside. Two local men, John Cooney and Michael McNulty, were driving home, their route taking them past Sraheens Lough. The road ran close to the lake, close enough that the headlights of their vehicle would have illuminated the shore and the nearby vegetation. As they drove, something extraordinary happened. A creature, clearly illuminated in the beams of their headlights, suddenly raced across the road directly in front of their vehicle. It was so close that they almost hit it. The men had no more than a few seconds to observe the creature as it crossed the road and vanished into dense foliage on the opposite side. But those few seconds left them with a vivid and detailed impression. The creature was enormous, far larger than any animal they were familiar with. They estimated its total length at somewhere between 8 and 10 feet, with a height at the shoulder of approximately 2.5 feet. This placed it in a size category comparable to a small horse or a very large dog, certainly far beyond anything that could be explained as a misidentified otter or seal. The color was distinctive, shiny dark brown or black, the creature's coat reflecting the headlights in a way that emphasized its sleek, water-adapted nature. The body structure was unlike anything in the men's previous experience. The head was relatively small, but this was attached to a long neck, almost swan-like in its proportions. The body was streamlined and muscular, clearly built for speed and power. The tail was substantial, long and sturdy, clearly used for balance and propulsion. But perhaps most striking were the legs. The creature had 4 well-developed legs, and the witnesses particularly noted that the hind legs appeared larger and more muscular than the front legs. When the creature ran, it rocked from side to side with each stride, a distinctive gait that suggested its body structure was optimized for swimming rather than terrestrial locomotion, yet it moved on land with surprising speed and facility. The head shape generated some debate between the witnesses. Cooney and McNulty both struggled to find an adequate comparison for what they had seen. The best they could do was liken it to either a sheep's head or a greyhound's, both of which emphasized the elongated snout and forward-facing eyes. This detail is significant because both comparisons suggest a streamlined skull structure, something aerodynamic and efficient, not the blocky head of a more typical dog or wolf. 1 week later, as if the universe wanted to confirm that the first sighting wasn't a hallucination or a case of mistaken identity, a second incident occurred. This time the witness was a teenager, either 15 or 16 years old depending on which account you read, named Gay Dever. He was riding his bicycle near Sraheens Lough, probably during daylight or the long Irish evening, enjoying the freedom and independence that a bicycle provided to a young person in rural Ireland. As Dever cycled along, a creature emerged from the lake or the vegetation near its shore. It climbed up a bank, and Dever, shocked by what he was seeing, actually stopped his bicycle to watch it. According to his account, the creature was massive, larger even than a horse. It was black in color, with a head similar to a sheep's but clearly not ovine, attached to a long neck. It had a substantial tail and 4 legs, with the hind legs again being more developed than the front legs. The creature's movement was distinctive and strange. Dever compared it to the way a kangaroo moves, using those powerful hind legs to propel itself forward in a bounding, hopping gait. He watched as it disappeared into the landscape, and then, his heart surely pounding, he remounted his bicycle and pedaled away as fast as he could. The descriptions from Cooney, McNulty, and Dever align remarkably well, especially considering these were independent sightings by different witnesses under different conditions. All describe a large aquatic creature, dark in color, with a streamlined body, long neck, distinctive tail, and that unusual rocking or hopping gait caused by the disproportionate development of the hind legs. These are not generic monster descriptions. These are specific, detailed observations that create a consistent picture of something unusual. But the Sraheens Lough incidents didn't end with those 2 sightings. Over the following weeks and months, several other reports came from the area. Not all of these were documented in as much detail as the first 2, but they established a pattern. Multiple witnesses, independently and at different times, were seeing something unusual in and around Sraheens Lough. Whatever it was, it hadn't simply passed through. It appeared to be resident in the area, or at least visiting it with some regularity. The descriptions that emerged from Sraheens Lough are significant for another reason beyond their internal consistency. They strongly echo the description carved on Grace Connolly's gravestone nearly 250 years earlier. The carving shows a creature with a dog-like body, relatively small head, substantial legs, and a long tail. The proportions, allowing for the stylization inevitable in stone carving and the limitations of the medium, match what the Sraheens Lough witnesses described. The similarity is striking enough that it's been commented on by numerous researchers and cryptozoologists. Either the Sraheens Lough witnesses were somehow influenced by the long-ago carving in a way that shaped their perceptions, or they were seeing the same type of creature that killed Grace Connolly. The Sraheens Lough sightings attracted attention from the cryptozoological community and from folklorists interested in the persistence of these legends into the modern era. Some investigators traveled to Achill Island to interview witnesses and investigate the area themselves. The consensus that emerged was that the witnesses were sincere, that they genuinely believed they had seen something extraordinary, and that their descriptions, while certainly describing something unknown to mainstream zoology, were detailed and consistent enough to warrant serious consideration. Skeptics, of course, offered alternative explanations. The small size of Sraheens Lough, with its circumference of only 1,200 feet, led some to argue that it simply couldn't support a population of large predatory animals. The entire lake could be walked around in perhaps 15 or 20 minutes. How could creatures 8 to 10 feet long, requiring substantial amounts of food, possibly live in such a confined space without being constantly visible? But this objection assumes that Dobhar-chú, if they exist, are permanently resident in individual lakes. What if instead they are migratory? What if they move from lake to lake, perhaps traveling overland or through connecting waterways? Ireland has thousands of lakes, many of them interconnected by rivers and streams. A creature that could function on land as well as in water could conceivably range over a wide territory, appearing in one lake for a time before moving on to another. This would explain how Sraheens Lough could have hosted Dobhar-chú in 1968 without requiring a permanent breeding population to be continuously present. The creatures could have been passing through, stopping at the lake to rest or feed before continuing their journey to some other destination. Modern encounters into the 21st century. As the 20th century drew to a close and the 21st century began, one might have expected reports of the Dobhar-chú to fade away, dismissed as products of a more superstitious age, unable to survive in an era of smartphones, DNA analysis, and scientific rationalism. Instead, sightings have continued, each adding another layer to the accumulated evidence, each providing more details that either support or complicate our understanding of what the Dobhar-chú might be. One of the most widely reported modern sightings occurred around the year 2000. Sources vary, with some citing the year 2000 and others 2003. The witnesses were Sean Corcoran, an Irish artist, and his wife. They were visiting Connemara in County Galway, specifically Omagh Island, a tidal island that can be reached on foot during low tide. Omagh Island is a place of stark beauty, largely uninhabited except for a handful of houses used mainly in summer, with beaches, dunes, and several small freshwater pools and lakes. The Corcorans were near one of these lakes when they witnessed something that left a lasting impression. A creature emerged, and what struck them immediately was its size. It was large, clearly much bigger than any ordinary aquatic animal they might have expected to encounter. The coloring was dark, a deep brown or black that would have made it almost invisible in darker waters. But what particularly caught their attention, what made their sighting unique in the annals of Dobhar-chú encounters, was the creature's appendages. Corcoran specifically described seeing orange flippers, or at least feet with a distinctly orange color and a flipper-like appearance. The creature's behavior was also remarkable. It didn't simply swim sedately across the lake. Instead, according to Corcoran's account, it moved with astonishing speed, crossing the width of the lake from west to east in what seemed like a matter of seconds. The speed described here suggests an animal of considerable power, capable of generating thrust far beyond what an ordinary otter or seal could manage. Having crossed the lake at this remarkable velocity, the creature then leapt onto a large boulder at the water's edge. And here comes one of the most distinctive elements of the Corcoran's account. Before disappearing, the creature emitted what Sean Corcoran described as the most haunting screech he had ever heard. This detail, the screech or cry, connects the Corcoran sighting directly back to the historical accounts. Remember that in the Grace Connolly story, the dying Dobhar-chú let out a distinctive whistle or cry that summoned its mate. The idea that these creatures communicate through unusual vocalizations appears across multiple independent accounts separated by centuries. Either this is a consistent element of a shared cultural narrative, or it represents actual observed behavior of an actual creature. The orange flippers or feet that Corcoran described are unique to his sighting and don't appear in any historical account. This could represent individual variation within a species, similar to how individual animals of the same species can have different coloration. It could represent a different subspecies or variant. Or it could be an error of observation, perhaps ordinary coloring seen under unusual lighting conditions that made it appear orange. Without additional corroborating sightings featuring this characteristic, it remains an intriguing but unexplained detail. Beyond the Corcoran sighting, there have been other reports in the 21st century, though many lack the detail and corroboration of earlier accounts. Some are little more than brief mentions online or in local newspapers. Someone claims to have seen something unusual in a particular lake, describes it in general terms as large and otter-like or dog-like, and then the trail goes cold before any serious investigation can occur. This is frustrating from a research perspective, but it's also entirely understandable. Most people who see something they can't explain don't want to be known as the person who claims to have seen a monster. The social cost of making such a claim, the likelihood of ridicule and disbelief, often outweighs any desire to contribute to knowledge or to have one's experience validated by others. There are hints, though, if you know where to look and who to ask. Local researchers and folklorists in Ireland continue to collect accounts, often shared privately, off the record, by people who don't want their names publicized. A fisherman will quietly mention seeing something strange rising from a lake at dawn. A woman walking her dog near a river will describe the animal going crazy, barking at something in the water that she couldn't quite make out but that seemed far too large to be an otter. A farmer will talk about hearing strange sounds from a nearby loch at night, a whistling or screaming that didn't match any animal he was familiar with. These accounts rarely make it into formal records. They circulate within communities, adding to a body of oral tradition that continues to this day. What's particularly interesting about the modern sightings is how much they resemble the historical accounts. In an era where people have access to films and television shows featuring all manner of fantastical creatures, you might expect modern sightings to be influenced by popular media, to describe things that look like movie monsters or CGI creations. Instead, the descriptions remain remarkably consistent with accounts from the 17th and 18th centuries. Large, dark, powerful, semi-aquatic, with unusual proportions and that distinctive locomotion. The creature being described in 2000 sounds essentially the same as the creature described in 1684. This consistency is significant. It suggests either a shared cultural narrative that has remained remarkably stable over centuries, or encounters with something real that has maintained consistent characteristics across multiple sightings. The Seventh Pup, Folklore and the Otter King. Beyond the eyewitness accounts and the physical evidence of Grace Connolly's grave, there exists a rich body of folklore surrounding the Dobhar-chú, stories that attempt to explain its origins, its nature, and the magical properties attributed to it. These folkloric elements blend natural observation, superstition, and genuine belief into narratives that have been passed down through countless generations. One of the most persistent and widespread beliefs concerning the Dobhar-chú is the story of the seventh pup. According to this folk tradition, when a female otter gives birth to a litter of 7 young, something extraordinary happens to the 7th born pup. From the moment of its birth, this 7th offspring is marked, destined to become something far greater and more terrible than its siblings. As it grows, it transforms, or perhaps merely reveals its true nature. It becomes a Dobhar-chú, blessed or cursed with size, strength, and ferocity far beyond what any ordinary otter could possess. This belief, which appears in various forms across Irish and Scottish folklore, links the Dobhar-chú directly to the natural world while simultaneously setting it apart. It's not a completely separate species, but rather a special form, a variation that arises under specific circumstances from the ordinary otter population. The number 7 holds particular significance in Irish and Celtic tradition. 7 is a number of completion, of perfection, of magic. To be the seventh of anything grants special status, special power. We see this across Irish folklore. The seventh son of a seventh son possesses healing powers or the gift of prophecy. The seventh wave in a set is the largest and most dangerous. The seventh pup becoming a Dobhar-chú fits into this broader pattern of seven being a number of transformation and power. But the seventh pup tradition does more than just explain the creature's origin. It also suggests that Dobhar-chú aren't numerous. If they only arise from seventh pups in litters of seven, and if ordinary otters don't always have litters that large, then Dobhar-chú would be relatively rare. This scarcity would explain why sightings are infrequent, why some lakes might host a Dobhar-chú for a time before going years or even decades without one. It would also explain why capturing or killing one doesn't lead to finding a population. There is no breeding population of Dobhar-chú. Instead, they continually arise from the normal otter population, mystical variants appearing according to laws that blend nature and magic. In Scottish tradition, we find parallel beliefs about an otter king, a creature of exceptional size and power. The Scottish legends specifically mention that this otter king is accompanied by 7 black otters, attendants or courtiers to its royal presence. If a human could capture the otter king, the creature would supposedly grant wishes in exchange for its freedom, much like a leprechaun caught by a clever human might be forced to reveal the location of his gold. But capturing an otter king was said to be extraordinarily difficult and dangerous. The creature was faster, stronger, and craftier than any ordinary otter, and its 7 attendants would come to its defense, attacking anyone who threatened their monarch. The parallels between the Irish and Scottish traditions are striking. Both emphasize the exceptional nature of these creatures, setting them above ordinary otters. Both connect them to the number 7, whether through birth order or through retinue. Both suggest that these are rare individuals rather than common animals. This consistency across related but distinct cultural traditions suggests either a shared origin for the legends, perhaps dating back to a common Celtic ancestor culture, or independent observations of similar phenomena on both sides of the Irish Sea. The magical properties attributed to the Dobhar-chú add another layer to the folklore. According to folk tradition, the pelt of a Dobhar-chú possesses extraordinary protective powers. Even a small piece of the fur, as little as an inch square, is said to be able to prevent disaster. Stories claim that a ship carrying such a charm would be protected from sinking, no matter how fierce the storm. A house containing a piece of Dobhar-chú pelt would never collapse, even in the worst earthquake or under the strongest wind. Most remarkably, a person wearing or carrying a bit of this magical fur would be safe from all wounds. Bullets would miss them or fail to penetrate. Knife blades would turn aside from their flesh. Arrows would go astray. These folk beliefs transform the Dobhar-chú from mere monster into something more complex. It's not just a danger to be avoided, but also a source of potential power and protection. This creates a strange dynamic where the creature is both feared and desired. To encounter a Dobhar-chú is to risk death, but to successfully kill one and claim its pelt is to gain something of immense value. This tension between danger and reward appears in many monster legends, but it's particularly pronounced with the Dobhar-chú. But the legends also include warnings about the consequences of killing a Dobhar-chú. We've already discussed how the creatures supposedly mate for life, and how the mate will pursue and attack anyone who kills its partner. But some versions of the folklore go further, suggesting that even if the second Dobhar-chú is also killed, even if the human survives the immediate encounter, there remains a curse. According to these darker tales, the killer of a Dobhar-chú is doomed. They will die within 24 hours of the killing, struck down by forces beyond human comprehension. No matter how safe they think they are, no matter what precautions they take, death will find them before the day is out. This curse, found in some but not all versions of the legend, adds a tragic dimension to stories like that of Terence MacLauchlan. Even in his moment of triumph, even as he stands over the bodies of the creatures that killed his wife. The shadow of this curse would hang over him. Did he know about it? Did he believe it? And if he did, what must those 24 hours have been like? Waiting to see if the old stories were true, wondering whether his vengeance would cost him his own life. The folklore also addresses the question of how to kill a Dobhar-chú, for according to the tales, these are not ordinary animals that can be dispatched with conventional means. Some traditions claim the creatures are nearly invulnerable. Their skin is thick and tough, resistant to normal weapons. Spears and swords might wound them, but rarely fatally. The only reliable way to kill a Dobhar-chú, these stories claim, is to strike a specific vulnerable point, a small spot just below the breast or at the base of the throat where the skin is thinner and vital organs lie close to the surface. Hit this spot precisely, and the creature will die. Miss it, and you've only enraged something that was already terrifyingly dangerous. Some variants of the legend claim that only a silver weapon can truly kill a Dobhar-chú, an interesting detail that links these creatures to other supernatural beings like werewolves and vampires that folklore says are vulnerable to silver. The use of silver as a specific counter to supernatural creatures appears across many cultures and many traditions, suggesting either a common origin or a universal understanding of silver's symbolic associations with purity, the moon, and the defeat of darkness. Water monsters in Celtic tradition. To fully understand the Dobhar-chú and its place in Irish folklore, we need to step back and consider the broader context of water creatures in Celtic mythology. Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and the other Celtic lands have a rich tradition of aquatic beings, creatures that dwell in lakes, rivers, and seas, and that interact with humans in ways ranging from helpful to deadly. The Dobhar-chú is not an isolated phenomenon, but rather one example of a widespread belief that bodies of water harbor entities that are neither entirely natural nor entirely supernatural. Water in Celtic tradition occupies a liminal space, a boundary between the world we know and the other world beyond our understanding. Lakes in particular were seen as portals or gateways, places where the membrane between realities grew thin. Offerings were thrown into lakes and rivers, valuable objects consigned to the depths as gifts to the gods or to the spirits that dwelt below. When archaeologists drain ancient Celtic sites, they often find extraordinary treasures at the bottom of what were once sacred pools. Weapons, jewelry, coins, all deliberately placed there as offerings to powers that were believed to inhabit or rule the waters. This understanding of water as a boundary space meant that aquatic creatures in Celtic folklore often possessed characteristics that set them apart from ordinary animals. They might be shapeshifters, appearing in one form on land and another in water. They might possess human-like intelligence or even the ability to speak. They might serve as guardians, protectors of the boundary between worlds, attacking those who approached without proper respect or preparation. Among the most famous of Celtic water creatures is the Kelpie, prominent in Scottish folklore but also appearing in Irish traditions. The Kelpie typically appears as a beautiful horse, often grey or black, that seems to be standing alone near a body of water. To an unwary traveller, particularly a child, it seems like a wonderful piece of luck, a fine horse, seemingly unowned, just waiting to be ridden. But to mount a Kelpie is to seal one's fate. The creature's hide becomes adhesive. The rider finds their hands and legs stuck fast. Then the Kelpie plunges into the water, dragging its victim down to drown and, in some versions, to be devoured, with only the liver left behind as evidence of the tragedy. The each-used, or water horse, is similar to the Kelpie but even more dangerous. Where Kelpies inhabit rivers and lakes, the each-used can be found in both fresh and salt water. It takes various forms, most commonly a horse, but sometimes a handsome man, or even a large bird. Like the Kelpie, it lures victims to mount it, then drowns them. But the each-used is credited with greater cunning and malevolence. It can come onto land and travel significant distances from water, making it even harder to avoid. Very different in nature but equally important in Celtic water mythology are the merrows, the Irish equivalent of mermaids. Merrows are depicted as having green-tinted skin, webbed fingers, and hair like seaweed. Unlike the sirens of Greek mythology or the often benevolent mermaids of modern children's stories, merrows occupy a middle ground in Celtic tradition. They are not typically malevolent, but they are not entirely benevolent either. They live in an underwater realm, wearing magical red caps that allow them to travel between their world and ours. If a human steals a merrow's cap, the creature cannot return to the sea and may be forced to remain on land, sometimes marrying a human but always yearning for the waters they can no longer reach. The Selkies, more common in Scottish and Scandinavian traditions, but also appearing in Irish folklore, add another dimension to Celtic water mythology. Selkies are seals that can shed their skins to become human, typically beautiful women. Like the merrows with their caps, if a human steals a Selkie's seal skin, the creature cannot return to the sea. Many folk songs and stories tell of lonely fishermen or farmers stealing a Selkie's skin to force her to become a wife, of years of marriage and children born, and then of the inevitable moment when the Selkie finds her hidden skin and, torn between love for her human family and the irresistible call of the sea, returns to the waves. The common thread through all these Celtic water creatures is the idea that water is not just water, that beneath the surface lie mysteries and dangers that transcend the natural world. Lakes and rivers and seas are not just geographic features but active presences, inhabited by entities that have their own natures, their own motivations, their own relationships with the human world. To approach water carelessly, to treat it merely as a resource or an obstacle, is to invite disaster. The Dobhar-chú fits perfectly into this tradition. It's a guardian of the waters, a deadly predator that enforces the boundary between human territory and the lakes and rivers that belong to another realm. Those who approach the water with respect, who are cautious and aware, might pass safely. But those who are careless, who let their guard down, who forget that they are entering a space that is not entirely their own, might encounter the water hound, and such encounters rarely end well. What distinguishes the Dobhar-chú from creatures like kelpies and merrows is its apparent lack of supernatural shape-shifting or magical abilities beyond its protective pelt. The Dobhar-chú doesn't transform into a beautiful horse to lure victims. It doesn't take human form or wear magical caps. It's portrayed as a flesh and blood creature, exceptional in size and ferocity certainly, but still fundamentally an animal rather than a spirit or fairy. This quality, this physical reality, makes the Dobhar-chú in some ways more frightening than more overtly magical beings. A kelpie you can avoid by refusing to mount strange horses. A merrow you can trap by stealing its cap. But a Dobhar-chú is just a predator, a very large, very aggressive predator that might attack anyone who comes too close to its territory. Against such a creature, there are no tricks, no clever strategies from folklore that will keep you safe. There is only caution, awareness, and if confrontation is unavoidable, courage and cold steel. Seeking explanations, cryptozoology and skepticism. So what are we to make of the Dobhar-chú? Is it a real creature, unknown to science but nevertheless existing in Ireland's lakes? Is it a case of mistaken identity, sightings of known animals misperceived under stressful conditions? Or is it pure folklore, a cautionary tale given form and substance through centuries of retelling? The answers proposed by cryptozoologists and skeptics illuminate not just the specific case of the Dobhar-chú, but the broader question of how we evaluate claims of unknown animals. Cryptozoology, the study of hidden or unknown animals, takes the Dobhar-chú seriously as a potential undiscovered species. Cryptozoologists note that new species are discovered regularly, even in the 21st century. Large mammals thought to be extinct are occasionally rediscovered. Areas that scientists believed were thoroughly explored yield surprises. The world, cryptozoologists argue, is still capable of harboring mysteries, and just because mainstream science hasn't catalogued something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. In the case of the Dobhar-chú, cryptozoologists point to several factors that support the possibility of its reality. First, there's the consistency of descriptions across time. Accounts from the 1680s describe essentially the same creature as accounts from the 1960s and beyond. This consistency is difficult to explain if the Dobhar-chú is purely imaginary. Folklore and legend typically evolve over time, with details changing as stories are retold. Yet the Dobhar-chú remains remarkably stable in its described characteristics. Second, there's the specificity of the descriptions. Witnesses don't just report a monster or something strange. They provide detailed accounts of size, coloration, body structure, movement patterns, and behavior. These details, particularly elements like the distinctive rocking gait and the disproportionate development of the hind legs, are not characteristics one would expect people to invent or to arrive at independently unless they were describing something they actually saw. Third, cryptozoologists note that giant otters have existed in the past. The fossil record shows that during the Miocene epoch, approximately 6 million years ago, there lived a species called Cyamygale melaleutra, a massive otter that could reach lengths of 6 feet or more. It had powerful jaws capable of crushing bones and shells, suggesting it was an apex predator in its ecosystem. While Cyamygale fossils have only been found in China, the existence of such creatures in the past demonstrates that giant otters are not biologically impossible. The question cryptozoologists pose is whether a descendant or relative of such species could have survived in isolated Irish lakes, though this remains purely speculative. The idea of a relict population, a species that has survived in small numbers in remote areas long after being thought extinct elsewhere, is not unprecedented in biology. The coelacanth, a fish thought to have gone extinct with the dinosaurs, was rediscovered alive and well in the 20th century. The mountain gorilla wasn't confirmed to exist until the early 20th century. Even in the 21st century, species like the Laurentian rock rat, thought to have been extinct for 11 million years, have turned up alive. Ireland has numerous deep, cold lakes, many of them in remote areas with limited human traffic. Could a small population of large aquatic predators survive there? Rarely seen, occasionally glimpsed, never quite proven. Cryptozoologists also point to the physical evidence. Grace Connolly's gravestone with its detailed carving of a creature that matches witness descriptions. Why would a community go to the trouble and expense of creating such a specific memorial if the event it commemorated was purely imaginary? The gravestone suggests that, at minimum, the people of 1722 believed Grace was killed by something unusual, something worth recording in stone for posterity. Skeptics, however, offer alternative explanations that don't require the existence of an unknown species. The most common skeptical argument is that Dobhar-chú sightings are cases of mistaken identity, ordinary animals seen under conditions that distorted perception. European otters can reach substantial sizes, up to 4.5 feet in length including the tail. In poor lighting, at a distance, or viewed by someone already frightened or expecting to see something unusual, might an ordinary otter appear larger than it actually is? Could a glimpse of a swimming otter, its body partially obscured by water, create the impression of something more dog-like or more monstrous? Seals are another common explanation offered by skeptics. Seals occasionally enter rivers and lakes from the sea, particularly young seals or individuals that have become disoriented. On land, a seal's locomotion is ungainly and could potentially be described as a rocking gait. A seal's size would certainly impress a witness, and seals can be aggressive if surprised or threatened. Could some Dobhar-chú sightings be encounters with seals that had wandered unusually far from their normal saltwater habitat? The problem with both the otter and seal explanations is that they don't fully account for the descriptions witnesses provide. European otters, even the largest specimens, don't reach 7 to 10 feet in length. Seals lack the terrestrial agility described in Dobhar-chú accounts. And both otters and seals are known animals, familiar to people who live near water. Would experienced fishermen, farmers, and other rural residents really mistake an otter or seal for something completely different? It seems unlikely, though not impossible. Skeptics also question the logic of a large predator surviving undetected in relatively small Irish lakes. Such a creature would require a substantial food supply. It would need to breed, meaning there would have to be a population, not just isolated individuals. Over centuries, some physical evidence beyond witness accounts should have emerged. Clear photographs, bodies of the creatures or their prey, DNA evidence, something more tangible than stories and a single weathered gravestone. The absence of such evidence, skeptics argue, weighs heavily against the Dobhar-chú's existence. The psychological explanation for monster sightings is also invoked. Humans have a strong tendency to pattern seek, to impose familiar forms on ambiguous stimuli. We see faces in clouds, animals in rock formations. We hear meaningful words in random noise. This pareidolia, combined with cultural conditioning, growing up hearing stories about the Dobhar-chú, could prime someone to interpret an ambiguous sighting in terms of the legendary creature. A brief glimpse of something moving in dim light, when the witness is already nervous about being near the water alone, could be mentally reconstructed as a Dobhar-chú encounter even if what was actually seen was something entirely ordinary. There's also the question of hoaxes. While most researchers believe the majority of Dobhar-chú witnesses are sincere, believing they saw what they reported, it's possible that some accounts have been fabricated or exaggerated. In the modern era, claims of monster sightings can bring attention, even a kind of celebrity status. Could some reports be deliberate inventions designed to create excitement or to attract tourists to an area? A more nuanced position recognizes elements of truth in both the cryptozoological and skeptical perspectives. Perhaps there is no species of giant otter currently living in Irish lakes, but perhaps the historical sightings reflect encounters with a species that did exist in the past but has since gone extinct. Otters' populations have fluctuated over the centuries due to hunting, habitat loss, and pollution. If there was once a larger variant or subspecies of otter in Ireland, it might well have been driven to extinction before scientists had a chance to properly document it. The stories, the legends, the gravestone, all would then be records of encounters with something that genuinely existed but exists no longer, making the Dobhar-chú simultaneously real and gone. The legacy endures. The story of the Dobhar-chú has proven remarkably resilient, surviving centuries of social change, technological advancement, and the general disenchantment of the modern world. In an age where satellite imagery maps every corner of the globe, where DNA analysis can identify species from a single hair, where cryptozoology is often dismissed as pseudoscience, the legend of the water hound persists. It continues to be told, to be discussed, to draw seekers of mystery to the shores of Irish lakes. Part of the Dobhar-chú's endurance surely lies in its connection to place. This isn't a generic monster story that could happen anywhere. It's intimately tied to specific locations: Glenade Lake, Loch Mask, Sraheens Lough, Omagh Island. These are real places that you can visit, landscapes that maintain their capacity to evoke wonder and unease. Standing on the shore of Glenade Lake, looking out across water that still reflects the sky as it did in 1722, the modern visitor can almost feel the weight of history, can almost imagine seeing something break the surface, something that shouldn't exist but somehow does. The gravestone in Cornwall Cemetery has become something of a pilgrimage site for those interested in Irish folklore and cryptozoology. Visitors come from around the world to see it, to photograph it, to trace with their fingers the worn carving of the creature that still guards Grace Connolly's memory. The cemetery itself, once simply a local burial ground, has gained a kind of fame by association with the legend. Local tourism boards mention it in their materials. Guidebooks to unusual Irish attractions include it. The Dobhar-chú, whatever its ontological status, real creature, extinct species, or pure legend, has become part of the cultural heritage of County Leitrim. Modern Irish artists and writers continue to draw inspiration from the Dobhar-chú legend. It appears in contemporary fantasy novels set in Ireland, in artwork depicting Irish mythology, in poems that blend ancient fears with modern concerns. The creature has achieved a kind of canonical status within Irish cryptozoology and folklore, sitting alongside better-known beings like banshees and leprechauns as an essential element of the Irish supernatural landscape. There's something deeply Irish about the Dobhar-chú legend, something that speaks to the Irish relationship with landscape, with water, with the past. Ireland is a country shaped by water. Its coastline is dramatic and intricate, carved by the sea into headlands and bays and hidden coves. Its interior is dotted with lakes of all sizes, from tiny pools to expansive lochs that seem more like inland seas. Rivers wind through every valley. Rain is abundant, shaping the green landscape that gives Ireland one of its many names. For a people so intimately connected with water, stories about what dwells in that water are not mere entertainment. They are part of the way Irish people understand and relate to their environment. The Dobhar-chú legend also serves as a reminder of danger, a cautionary element that perhaps has practical value. Ireland's waters can be genuinely hazardous. Lakes that appear calm on the surface can harbor dangerous currents. The water is often very cold, capable of inducing hypothermia even in summer. People have drowned in Irish lakes and rivers throughout history. Warning children away from unsupervised play near water, teaching respect for the dangers water presents. These are lessons that the Dobhar-chú legend reinforces. It's less frightening to tell a child about a specific monster they should avoid than to explain the more abstract but equally real dangers of cold water, unexpected depths, and hidden currents. On a deeper level, the persistence of the Dobhar-chú legend might reflect a human need for mystery, for a world that retains pockets of the unknown. We live in an age of information overload, where seemingly every question can be answered with a quick internet search, where few places on Earth remain unexplored and unmapped. Yet perhaps we're not quite ready to live in a completely known world, a world where every mystery has been solved and every shadow explained. Legends like the Dobhar-chú preserve a sense of wonder, a possibility that there might still be things in this world that science hasn't explained, places where the rational and the magical still blur together. The debate over the Dobhar-chú's reality will likely never be definitively resolved. Without a body, without incontrovertible physical evidence, neither believers nor skeptics can claim complete victory. And perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps the Dobhar-chú serves its purpose best by remaining ambiguous, neither proven nor disproven, a creature that swims through the liminal space between known and unknown, between natural and supernatural. What we can say with certainty is that the Dobhar-chú matters to people. It has mattered for centuries. It will likely continue to matter as long as there are Irish lakes, as long as there are people willing to tell and to listen to stories, as long as there remains in the human heart a place for wonder and for fear. Closing thoughts. As we bring our journey through the legend of the Dobhar-chú to a close, we find ourselves perhaps where we began, standing on the shore of an Irish lake, looking out across dark waters that might conceal mysteries we cannot fully understand. We've traveled through time, from the earliest written records in the 17th century to modern sightings in the 21st. We've examined physical evidence, listened to witness accounts, explored the folklore and mythology that surrounds this creature. And yet the essential question remains unanswered. What is the Dobhar-chú? Is it a real species, a giant otter variant that has somehow eluded scientific documentation? Is it an extinct creature, once real but now gone, living on only in legend and in the carved stone that marks Grace Connolly's grave? Is it a case of mistaken identity, ordinary animals seen under extraordinary circumstances? Or is it purely a creation of folklore, a story told to explain tragedies and to warn of dangers, given substance by the power of belief and the human tendency to find patterns even where none exist? The answer, if there is one, may be that the Dobhar-chú is all of these things and none of them. It exists in that undefined space between fact and fiction, between natural and supernatural, a space that perhaps serves humanity better than any definitive resolution could. The Dobhar-chú reminds us that the world retains mystery, that not every question has an immediate answer, that there are still shadows where something unexpected might dwell. For the people of Ireland, the legend serves multiple purposes. It's a link to the past, a connection to ancestors who lived closer to nature, who understood the landscape in ways that we, with our modern detachment, have perhaps lost. It's a warning that nature demands respect, that water is not merely a resource but a realm with its own rules and its own dangers. It's a source of wonder and pride, a unique element of Irish cultural heritage that distinguishes the Emerald Isle from everywhere else on Earth. And yes, for some, it remains a real possibility, a creature that might still swim in the deep lakes, rarely seen but still present, a living connection to an older, wilder Ireland. Grace Connolly's gravestone endures, its carved image still visible after 3 centuries of weather and wear. It stands as a testament not just to one woman's tragic death, but to the enduring power of stories to shape how we see the world. Every person who visits that grave, who traces the outline of the carved Dobhar-chú, becomes part of the legend's continuation. The story lives on because it matters to people, because it touches something deep in human consciousness, a place where fear and wonder intertwine. As for you, dear listener, I hope this journey into the legend of the Dobhar-chú has stirred your imagination. I hope you'll look at water a little differently now, perhaps with more respect, certainly with more wonder. And who knows? If you find yourself one day walking beside an Irish lake, if you see the water ripple in a way that doesn't quite match the wind, if you hear a sound that doesn't quite match any animal you know, well, then you'll have your own story to add to the centuries of tales that surround the water hound of Ireland. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into one of Ireland's most captivating legends. If you enjoyed this exploration of the Dobhar-chú, I'd be incredibly grateful if you would consider subscribing to Emerald Dreams and giving this video a like. Your support helps me continue creating content that explores the rich folklore and mythology of Ireland. If there's a particular Irish legend or mythological creature you'd like me to cover in a future video, please let me know in the comments below. Until next time, may your waters be calm and your shadows friendly. This is Emerald Dreams, where the magic of Ireland comes alive.